out there in the My Wealth Journey community. This is Jay Stevens, and we are back with another episode of Everybody Knows Somebody Who Knows Something About It. This is our series where we talk to somebody who knows something about a topic that we are interested in. Today's topic, y'all know I'm talking about student loans because at least once a week, I bring up something about student loans and how I really wish somebody would just make my student loans disappear. But today, instead of asking my student loans to disappear, we are going to back up in time and say, how do you avoid the student loans to start with? How do you plan for that? So our special guest today is Jack Wayne. Jack is a noted expert in helping US-based families with middle to high school grade students lower the cost and pay for college by navigating the complex, stress-inducing financial aid system while still being able to retire. And that is such a need because people get to the age of retirement and they think, I can't do it because I need to pay for my child's tuition. Jack has helped hundreds of families and students, including his own 2 children, navigate financial aid, student loan options, and payment strategies in the context of overall family finances and retirement plans. He's owned his own practice for almost 15 years. That's long enough to see someone go from grade school all the way to the point where they need to start paying for college and preparing for it. But his primary focus on college planning aspect has started for the past 6 years. His sons have graduated college, with his youngest just graduating University of Massachusetts, and his wife has an almost 17-year-old and 13-year-old, which means he's not just doing this because he cares, but because it's personal. He's going to go through this process again. So everyone say hello to Jack. Hello, virtually. Picture there in the audience. They're putting it in the comments. They're saying hello. So Jack, Absolutely. First things first. I gave the bio. Thank you for coming on today. But we want to hear from you. What's your wealth journey? What's your story?
Yeah, it's great to be on. Thanks so much for having me, Jay. I really appreciate it. And hi to everybody out there. So how I've always wanted to help people, and my own college journey, I knew I wanted to study business, and I did. I was a finance major at the University of Texas. Shout out for them, by the way. Yes. But the college focus specifically was actually out of kind of a less than positive situation. So at the time, my 2 sons were young high school. I was actually getting divorced. And as part of that divorce agreement, we had to make a provision for college. And so at the time, I knew about the basics, right? Like, oh, here's different ways and a 529 or what have you to save for college. But like most people, I didn't really, and like most financial advisors, I would say planners, I didn't really know that much more about it until I had to live it, right? So what kind of kicked me off was I was playing on a men's baseball team at the time, and just coincidentally, one of my teammates was a financial aid officer for a big time university here in the Boston area. Yeah. So we, in between innings, I'm just peppering him with questions, right? That even today you can't really Google, right? Unless you work in the industry or you have this insider knowledge. And so he really got me sort of a lot of help because I wanted to know for myself, right? But then I realized, well, you know what? If I want to know, other people want to know. And so he really helped me get started, not sort of in the business in general, but really kind of understanding the nuances and the nitty-gritties of financial aid and how it works and all this other stuff. And we're still friends today. We still talk about this, but I started going down this path and have made it my business because it is so complicated. So a lot of families aren't going through a divorce, but even for families who aren't going through divorce, this is still complicated. But it really started because I needed to know it. Right? And that's where it all sort of began. On a baseball field of all
and the fact that you made that connection, but you also saw it as an opportunity because you're right. So I like to work with high school students outside of my wealth journey, and it's this misunderstanding, maybe even a misnomer, that financial aid is an aid for you, like that universities are designed to give you this aid. I mean, they'll give you financial aid, but it's still a for-profit organization. And you shouldn't count on the university being the ones to do it's not that they wouldn't act in your best interest. Like, it's not like they don't understand the importance, the custodial impact there, but it's more so they are still a business. So you have got
Right.
to do your research and figure it out as a consumer in this case, and figure out what you need, how you're going to be able to afford college. So how do you do that? How do you explain all these complicated ideas and all the different ways that there's the different options, the ways that families can navigate this? How do you help your clients? Like, walk us through what it's like to be part of the Jack Wang experience.
Yeah, thanks. And you're absolutely right. People have to remember that colleges are business. Now, for the most part, colleges are nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that they're not still trying to earn money, right? Just at the end of the day, they whatever profit they earn, they pay out to their professors or build a new building or whatever the case may be. So people really kind of get confused by, how does this work? What counts, what doesn't count? Do I need to fill out the financial aid forms, or when do I do it? And it is all very confusing. But I'm going to sort of take a step back. And there's so many analogies for this. So I'm going to use, for example, airline tickets. Okay. So you know that if you're going to fly somewhere, the price that you pay for the ticket depends on like what day of week you fly, right? Some days are more expensive than others, right? What time of day, whether you're flying coach or first class, and even the destination. So of course, like Thanksgiving is a perfect example. It's the busiest travel week of the year. So during that time, if you want to fly anywhere, you are paying through the nose for airline tickets because there's such demand. Well, what does that have to do with college? Well, college is still supply and demand. So if you want to apply to the most in-demand schools where they get all the applications, right? Or for the most sort of in-demand majors or whatever, you're going to pay more. So at the highest level, there's two things to remember. Number one, it is not about the student in of themselves. Remember that when colleges receive applications, for the most part, right, almost all colleges do this, they're comparing the student to everybody else who applies. So parents often say, oh, but my kid has great grades and great test scores. And okay, that's great and that's awesome. But how does that look compared to everybody else, right? So if everybody else has great grades and great test scores, then your student is average. And I know it's hard to hear that.
They are the average. That is the average.
It's hard to hear that. Yeah. So first thing is they're compared to everybody else. The second thing to remember is that it is about the college, right, or university, but the school itself has its own priorities. So if schools may be expanding one major, we're creating a new nursing program, so we're looking for kids to fill it. Or we don't have enough kids from the West Coast because we're East Coast school. Or we don't have enough boys, or we don't have enough girls, or we don't have enough kids in this major, or whatever the case may be, right? It's about whatever priorities they're trying to fill. So if you think about those two things, how you get the most aid, right? Regardless of whatever, your income is, assets is, or whatever, right? How you get the most aid is determined by how much the college wants your kid for whatever reason they want your kid. So if a lot of people, I tell that to people are like, no, yeah, so my kid's going to get in. No, that's not what I mean, because tons of kids get into college with no aid, right? No scholarships, no financial aid. So college basically says, look, if you're willing to come here, we'll let you pay full sticker price. And many families do, right? Which is ultimately sort of the whole college debt thing, right? But if you're trying to avoid debt to begin with, the more the school wants you, the more aid they're going to give you. So using a sports analogy, is your kid a starter or is your kid a bench warmer, right? And same thing at the pro levels. If you're the superstar, you get the big contract. If you're the bench warmer, you make league minimum.
Right.
Same exact thing here. So, right, so part of how to lower the cost of college, and kind of to answer your question about what I do, starts with, where are you even looking? So for people who say, you know what, I have to go to the Ivy League school, right? And in the most popular major there that most of the kids apply to and stuff, and that is absolutely what I have to do, then you're going to pay more, right? There's such huge demand. It's unrealistic it would be no different than if you or IJ were to say to the airline, look, I'm going to fly on Thanksgiving and I want first class and I want you to give me the seat for like $10, right? They're going to be like, get out of line, right? Beat it.
Right.
College is the same thing. So a lot of what I do to start is look for the right schools. And so that's based on the academics. That can also be based on the family profile. This is where you now get into like the different formulas and what counts and what doesn't count. So depending on family circumstances, I may direct a family towards a certain type of school versus another that would give them the best chance for aid or money overall, right? So there's a lot of sort of filters, if you will, that I go through. So you start with that, and that right there determines a lot, like a good chunk of lowering the cost of college. But then, right, so even if you get a big scholarship, chances are you're still going to have to pay something. So then the second part kicks in, which is, all right, how do we actually pay that bill efficiently? So it could be a combination of different financial strategies. It could be some advanced tax strategies. That's something that I'm particularly good at, is using tax savings to pay for college. There could be debt strategies where I intentionally have a client family take on debt, not the way that most people think, like, oh, I'm going to get saddled with this, but have them intentionally take on debt to bridge the time between the start and end of college so that something else can happen, right? Or it's a combination of all those things. So it's pretty advanced, but all families can take care of it. And so just to give you an idea of what the bottom line result is, high income families can go to college and between a combination of all these different strategies can shave half or more off the cost of college per year. Right. So if it's an $80,000 a year school, you can maybe go for like 30 or 20 after it's all said and done, after all these. I have another client where we're going to use income tax savings alone, right? Mm-hmm. Just the tax savings alone. That will pay for all 4 years of in-state public.
Done. What kind of tax wizardry is that?
Done.
That's impressive.
Done. Yeah. So there are high income families are the ones who say, oh, I'm too rich to get aid. That's actually not true. Low income families, might get a lot of financial aid, but then, some of these things can still apply because if they don't have a lot of income or assets anyway, then what I say is you have to be that much more careful with it, right? You can't just be blown out of college. So that's what I do in a nutshell. And the more you do that up front, right, the less debt you have to take on the back end.
Got it. So it's a multi-step process of looking at where this student will be in the I would say the higher I guess of rankings of like the ideal student for that university. So you find the university that wants you. And it's not just because you have good grades or you play a sport really well. It's the number of factors that can go into it. The fact that you mentioned we're at East Coast school and we need more students from the West Coast. We want more. I hadn't considered that. And then once you get the bill, looking at how do we strategically cover this? So, and the fact that someone can go to school off of tax savings, that is impressive. I've never heard of that. That's impressive. But also,
I'll just say this, because most people, right, the majority of American families think about paying for college in a very binary way. It's either you saved up for it in advance,
right,
and then you paid, or you didn't save up for it in advance and then you take on debt,
right?
Like it's one or the other, right? And what I try and tell people is that there are other ways, right, that tend to be very creative and not what most people think, but this is what I do every day. So I spend all my days thinking about weird strategies on how to pay for college.
That is a
that
superpower.
you might have never even heard of before.
Right. So, okay, I actually have another question based on that. This one actually came from a listener, an audience member. So, is it worth it for parents to obtain a 529 or UGMA? And for context, 529 and UGMA. So, UGMA is an acronym, Uniform Gifts to Minors Act, and it's a way that parents can kind of set aside the money earlier in the child's life, so that it's ready by the time the child gets to college. There's similar programs for if a child wants to buy a home, for a child's medical costs, but it's pretty much like you put away the money in advance, and sometimes it has a tax benefit. So like it reduces your tax liability to say you're saving in these different areas. But is it worth it? Is that part of the planning? And a second part of that is it necessary? So actually, I'll save the second part of it for just a second. But for right now, is it worth it to do those kind of pre-planning? Pre-planning is redundant. To do the planning of how to start paying for college using those tools.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I do get a lot. And by the way, before I answer the question, let's just sort of preface this that this is not financial advice; it's for education.
Oh yes. This is a disclaimer. This is for educational yet entertainment purposes. Please speak with your financial advisor to get personalized financial advice.
Yeah, thanks. So let's sort of take it more broadly in that, when's the best time to plan for college? Well, the reality is, like the day your kid's born, right? But truthfully, like in my own situation, when my sons were born, the last thing I was thinking about was college, right? I was thinking about diapers and formula, and every time you take your baby out, you're packing like you're going away for a month, right? Extra clothes and wipes, I mean, just whatever. So, so the last thing I'm thinking about is 529s or college or whatever, because I'm up to my eyeballs in diapers. So the reality is, because of that, most families don't save very early. Okay. Now, just to be clear, I do late stage planning. So most of the time when kids come to me, they're middle school to high school already. So it's really,
that's what people need.
So to your question about sort of, is it worth using 529 or UGMA? What I would say is that saving for college is always worth it, generally. But it really depends on your circumstances. So 529s can be very advantageous. It's a very popular savings vehicle, right? You put in money, if you take it out and use it for college or even private K through 12 school, it comes out can come out tax-free, and things like that. But at the same time, it's also very restrictive, right? So if that money you put in there, you then need because your car broke down or you need it for retirement or something else, you can use the money for that, but you end up paying taxes and a penalty. So if you know that you're only going to use that money for college or private K through 12 costs, then sure, it can be a perfectly fine way to do it. A UGMA account or a UTMA account, depending on the state, is in the kid's name. And that can also be a really good way to pay for college or to save for college. The tax implications are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. The financial aid implications are a little bit different, but you do get the benefit of flexibility. So whereas, when your kid grows up and gets their license, you may want to buy them a car because they want to work or something. Oh, okay. Well, you can use money in a UGMA account for that. You cannot do that out of a 529, right? Or let's suppose your kid ultimately doesn't go to college or doesn't go right away. Okay, fine. You can always delay the withdrawals, but if they decide not to go to college, let's say because they started a business, you can't use the 529 for that, but you can use the UGMA. So those are some of the trade-offs that you run into. And so there are many different ways to save for college. 529, UGMA, Roth IRAs, whatever. It just all sort of depends on how much flexibility you want and the rest of your finances. So for example, Roth IRA can be really effective because if you're trying to save for college, but you also want to save for retirement, well, if if you don't use the money for retirement, then it's available for college, right? So it's a way to sort of kill two birds with one stone, proverbially. So there are a lot of these factors. I will say that from a financial aid perspective, if you're going to qualify for financial aid, right, which is another question you have to figure out, then saving in a UGMA or UTMA is not as good because it weighs heavier on the financial aid formula. A 529 would be better. On the other hand, if you're not going to qualify for financial aid, then it kind of doesn't matter, right? And sometimes you may want to save in a UGMA versus something else because the kids' tax rates are lower than the adults, right? So it becomes some tax planning also. So it varies. I know people who have said, hey, I'm going to buy some rental property, right, when my kid's young, and generate rental income and arrange to pay off the mortgage in 15 years. And then when the kid goes to college, I'll sell the rental property and the proceeds of that will pay for college, right? You can do that too. There's really no limit in terms of how you can save for college.
Yes. And what I like about your answer, one, it gives the pros and cons between both. It's not like you said, there's just this clear-cut answer of absolutely always do this or sometimes do this. It really is unique. And you gave the right perspective. You gave the facts of these are the different pros and cons of both options. But the important part that I think I got out of all of that is it's personal. And that's what we advocate for a lot with My Wealth Journey. The My Wealth Journey is because it's for you. It's no one will always have the exact same process of how they build wealth for themselves, because we are all leading different lives. We're in different parts of the world, different ages, backgrounds, whatever. And there's factors that you just can't control, but you can control how you personalize it and how you make it work for you. So thank you for unknowingly underscoring one of the firm, one of the foundational beliefs of having a personalized wealth journey.
Yeah.
Okay,
let me also add this. Sorry, Jay, sorry to interrupt. In all my years in doing this, I've seen sort of every variation, and part of it is if you ask a family, right? If you ask a parent, hey, do you want to save for college? Now, the people who come to me, the answer to that is obviously yes, right? If they don't want to do anything with college, they don't come see me. But you'd be amazed at sort of how many different variations there are, especially among married couples. Because if you ask a married couple, hey, do you want to save for your kids' college? At least in my world, the answer is almost always yes. But then when you drill down, you say, okay, but you ask one parent, okay, but what do you actually mean by that? Right? Well, one parent might say, well, I had to work my way through college, so I want my kid to have skin in the game, so I'm willing to pay half of the in-state tuition. And that's what I'm going to save for. Okay. The other parent might say, well, my parents took care of my college, so I don't have debt, and I hear these stories about that, so I don't want to put that onto my kid. So I'm willing to pay 100% of private school. Okay. And they're both correct answers, but they're both very, very different answers, because if you think about a typical in-state college, half of an in-state college might be $10,000 to $20,000 versus a 100% of a private school can run as much as $80,000, right? Huge difference. So when you ask people, so do you want to help pay for college? You want to save for college? Not only do you need to decide what is the best place to save it, but also for a lot of families is, what do you actually mean by that? Right? Because there are huge differences, and I run into that kind of stuff all the time.
You know what? I'm guessing sometimes that revelation isn't clear until they are working with you, or because they might, you definitely, as a married couple, or just co-parenting, however you decide to, however your family is set up, you will have conversations about finances. Like, we know we've got to pay the mortgage, or we got a car note, who goes to buy the groceries. It's kind of the budget for groceries. But again, like you said, people tend to think of college later. There's so many other things that you have to do day to day that you do not think about. What does my spouse, what does this other guardian, what do they think of when it comes to affording college? And even if you know, go to homecoming with your spouse and you've seen their college friends, and you're like, I must know your college experience. You really might not know. I know when I was in college, I had more jobs than I had classes, and I had a lot of classes, but because I was a double major, but I was determined to be able to afford college on my own. Not to say my parents didn't help, my parents did help, but I was determined to be able to afford college. I wanted to be able to have a little bit of pocket money if I wanted to go out. And then I didn't have a car. So I always wanted to have a little money set aside if I to give as gas money whenever someone gave me a ride, especially because I wasn't in school at the time in a metropolitan city where it's like, oh, you can just walk somewhere. And this is before Uber. I know it's wild to believe, but we used to have to call taxis and hope that they would come and pick us up. And I definitely was stranded before calling a taxi, and they never came. But fortunately, I had a friend, I had gas money set aside. I was able to do something to make sure that, you know, I can still be mobile. And then when I actually get wherever I'm going, I have money to spend. So yeah, I agree. It is personal. It is a conversation that needs to be had sooner rather than later. But even if it's too late, you are there. Your skills are there. There's tax planning. There's ways to move forward. So my last question for you, and this one might be a little bit. It's this. So I mentioned there was a part two to this. In your opinion, will college be free in the next 10 years, 15 years, whatever time frame? There's always politicians who say they want to make college more affordable. There's universities who say they want to encourage higher education. And you mentioned earlier supply and demand. There are more people who are starting to see that the cost of college, because planning, they may have not planned it out, the cost of college is such a burden that they're saying, you know, I'm just going to go out into the workforce. I'll join the armed services. I'll do something. I'll be an entrepreneur because this initial cost of college is a burden I can't handle. And so that supply is kind of going down. But is it going down enough? Are there enough politicians pulling for it? Are there enough universities that are pushing for change that college actually could be free? And all of this is for naught. And no one needs to really save for college.
Yeah, it's such a great question. The short answer is I don't know, but here's what I see. I think in the future, some colleges will be free, but not necessarily in the way that most people think, right? There's been a lot of discussion about making community colleges free, okay? And of course, community colleges are all in on that idea because it essentially becomes guaranteed funding for them, right, from the government. But in the private sector, you know, what we're seeing are things like more and more companies are expanding tuition benefits to pay for their employees to go to college, right? There are student loan repayment benefits that's really gaining in popularity. So yeah, the student had to take on the debt, but now the employer is helping you pay for it. And there are specific programs now that certain employers are sponsoring. So I think that free college is a possibility, but I think how you get there, the way that's kind of going is that it might be free as a result of what's happening in the private sector versus in the public sector, right? You know, which is, by the way, I mean, this is, you know, there's tons of questions about fairness, right, and social equity, and so that isn't all right. That answer isn't necessarily the fair answer, and I recognize that. At the same time, you know, companies such as Google and I think Facebook, I know Amazon, they're developing their own training programs in conjunction with community colleges to where you can go take a Google certified class and then you work for Google even though you don't have your college degree. And the companies, I think, are subsidizing a large portion of those costs, right? So it's not quite free, but close to it. So I think that there's a number of initiatives that will get us close to some level of free college. But the question remains, and I see this a lot even today. Mm-hmm. Just because something's free, do you want it? Maybe, maybe not, right? So if you think about if your aim is to go to an Ivy League college, but then the local community college is free, do you go to that community college? Probably not, right? And this is not saying whether someone should or shouldn't.
Right.
The reality is they're probably not going to go, right? If they're aiming at like Harvard. And to that end, there's still a large perception of these brand name schools being quote unquote better. And colleges do play into this, right? Because as consumers, colleges understand that as they raise their prices, the sticker price, a $80,000 a year college is perceived to be better than a $60,000 a year college. That's just human nature, right? And so, from decades ago when going to an Ivy League truly mattered, that legacy still exists. So the pandemic especially has exacerbated that trend where the top 100, 200 schools, right, in the country, there's 4,000 colleges in the country, but the top 100, 200 get 80 to 90% of all college applications, right, around the country. So all these high school kids are trying to cram into these 200 schools. So that's that supply and demand, right? So these top schools really don't need to give out a ton of aid because the line to get in is a mile long, wrapped around the building and into the next parking lot, right? But that also means that all these other schools, the other 3,800 schools around the country, are scrambling for applications, and that's where you get these huge bargains. But you can't get the mindset out of parents like, oh, if my kid doesn't go to Georgetown, his life is over. No, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Right? That's just simply not true. But because it's been so ingrained in decades of why Ivy Leagues are better, it takes time to change that. So I guess my answer to you is I think college to some extent might be free in some way, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Right?
Yes. I think there was a little bit of an echo. So I had not considered it that way. And you're right, it's the value perception. Just because something is more affordable, is it still the desirability to it that I saw before? Does it? And of course, since there is a monetary amount tied to going to college, it's easy to say this is worth this much, this is worth that much. It must be more like this is the Louis Vuitton versus this is the Walmart brand. But if the real goal is to get an education, to move further along in life, at what point do you look at value and brand versus the output and where it gets you, and the fact that you'll still get a job right. afterwards? But then I've also been told the importance of the network, and how many presidents of boards and CEOs and other things like that are alumni from your university, and how that kind of ties into the college rankings and whether or not this is a valuable university, right. like the network that's there.
Right. I'll one comment on that, because I've heard that a bunch. And then I read the study about the value of the network at Ivy Leagues, right? And the study, and I apologize, I can't remember, this was a while ago, but they only identify one group of students that truly benefits from that. And that's first-gen low-income families.
Oh.
And the reason for that is because if you are a mid to senior level executive and upper to high income family, right, and your kid goes to Harvard, let's say, and just picking on Harvard, there's not a lot of incremental value. Yes, they're going to meet other kids from other families, but chances are, as the parent, you already have that network, and as a parent, you're going to help out your kid, right? So the benefit of the kid getting the network is much smaller because you already have the network, right? Now, on the other hand, if you're from a first-gen low-income family and your parents are blue-collar workers in a factory, they probably don't know a lot of other executives or whatever. So the kid going off to a Harvard and Ivy League to meet kids from those other families whose parents and who will be mid to upper level executives, that actually has some value. Now, is that actually true? I don't really know, but it seems to intuitively make sense to me, because I know in my case, right, I'm not some big high-powered executive at some major corporation, But I know in my case, I've made introductions for my kids, right, of other business people I know and my stepkids and stuff. And if they ask me in the future, I will continue to do that. So they can benefit from what and who I know. But stereotypically, first-gen low-income families don't have that network. So the study said that that the value of that network really helps them and not much anybody else.
This is the third time that you have taken something I thought I understood and flipped my perception of it. So at first it was the concept that you start with what college will want you the most. The next is the idea that, or the concept that the way you afford college, it's a personal journey. I mean, I understood the fact that it was personal, but that there are so many different ways you can go about it, including taxing. I just don't like the fact that that exists. And then right now with what you're saying, the network is important, but it's different depending on whether or not you already have access to a network like that. And then even for that matter, for the low income person, for the person who doesn't have that network, are they going to be welcomed into this community when they get to the university? So that's another level of it, because like you said, this will be a group of people where, yes, they're meeting other like-minded people, other people who have a similar background. But if they already have these connections, they've already maybe vacationed together with this family. And so it's really, these bonds were already there. They started in elementary school. They started at the Montessori school or whatever, after the piano lessons, whatever proper grooming took place at a younger age. So will this low-income student, will this child who is not part of this community be accepted, be welcomed in? And that's not to say the people wouldn't welcome them in. It's just, this is very new to them. And will they feel like they fit? Will they suffer with imposter syndrome to the impact of, I don't know if this works, I'm going to do the best I can with where I'm at and what I have. So that's all important things to consider. And the fact that, yes, college is a value-based proposition of how much is this college worth to me? How much does it cost? What does it look like to others when I have this on my resume? All of this, great advice. But you mentioned before, and we'll underscore it. Like I said, we've underscored it a couple of times. This is personal. So people need to understand what really works for them. They just can't listen to one 30-minute episode and think they have all the answers. So how can people find you? How can people get this personalized support and training and advice and planning that you do so well? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so people can always email me at jack@innovativewealth.com, all together. Yeah. Or people can follow me on LinkedIn, Jack Wang, or follow my business page, which is actually called Smart College Buyer on Facebook. And on both of those social media platforms, I post articles and videos on all aspects related to college admissions and financial aid. So even if you don't want to hire me, which not everybody does, and that's okay. No, but if you follow me on those platforms, you can actually learn a lot about how this game is played.
Well, I'm definitely going to be introducing, dropping your name, because like I said, I work with high school students, and this is a question that they start asking somewhere around junior year, which I think is too late. Like, this is, like you said, but the way it was explained to me, once you took the pregnancy test and found out you were pregnant, start saving for college, because it's going to cost money. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on today. Thank you for all of this advice. This is really helpful. And I'm sure if the audience were live right now, they would be applauding and running up to the stage to say, let me get a little bit of time with Jack. So thank you very much for coming on today. You're always welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you, Jay. I really appreciate the time and glad we have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.